Nice ffordd dda, bawb. Good evening, everybody. Croeso cynnes iawn I chi I gyd I ddarlith Nadolig Cymdeithas Hynaf-iaith Cymru mewn partneriaeth gyda'r Comisiwn Brenhinol Henebion Cymru. Heno, fydd Richard Suggett yn trafod darganfod miliniau yn y Glwysi Cymru. A very warm welcome to you all to the Cambrian Archaeological Association Christmas Lecture in partnership with the Royal Commission. Tonight, my former colleague Richard Suggett will be talking about discovering wall paintings in Welsh churches. Mae Richard wedi ymddeol yn ddiweddaraf ar ôl dros 20 mlynedd yn gweithio fel ymchwilydd i'r Comisiwn Brenhinol. Cleir oedd ei brif eddodeb mewn pensaniaeth frodorol. Yn ostod y cyfnod clo, fe draftiodd destun y llyfr Miliniau, sy'n destun sgwrs heno. Richard has recently retired after over 40 years working as an investigator for the Royal Commission, where his chief interest was in vernacular architecture. During lockdown, he drafted the text of the wall paintings book, which is the subject of tonight's talk. But before Richard speaks, Sian Rees, the chair of the Cambrian Trustees, will be saying a few words about the Cambrian Association. I'll hand over to her in a moment, but before I do so, can I just note that this evening's talk will be recorded and also shared on other platforms. For those not watching this live, you're also welcome to send us any questions or share your comments, and Richard will reply to them as soon as possible. Bydd y sgwrs hon drwy gyfrwng y Saesneg heno, cofiwch fod croeso I chi gysylltu â ni yn y Gymraeg os ydych chi'n am ofyn cwestiwn neu adael sylw. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Sian to say a couple of introductory words on behalf of the Cambrian Archaeological Association before then she hands over to Richard. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Hello, everybody. I'm Sian Rees, the chair of the trustees of the Cambrian Archaeological Association. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome to so many of you to our Christmas lecture held in partnership with the Royal Commission on Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. And the Cambrians have had a good year in 2022, just to insert a ray of optimism within this current rather bleak environment. Our summer meeting in the Ribble Valley and our autumn meeting in Cowbridge and our new Walks and Talks programme and our lecture at the National Eisteddfod gave us the opportunity to offer as wide an audience as possible the chance to explore historic sites and topics within and outside Wales, and were well attended. And of course, we should celebrate the publication this year of our journal, Archaeologia Cambrensis, the last to be edited by Bill Britnell, who has undertaken that role so brilliantly for over 20 years. And now, as our rousing farewell to this year of post-COVID recovery, we have another of our Christmas lectures. We're so lucky that so many exciting things are always happening in Welsh archaeology, whether it be an extraordinary and unexpected chariot burial in Pembrokeshire, or now the publication of this important and scholarly book on wall paintings and rood screens in Welsh churches by Richard Suggett. It makes the job of the trustees of the Cambrian Archaeological Association in selecting subjects for these lectures very straightforward. So it's with great pleasure that I now ask Richard Suggett to deliver his lecture, Discovering Wall Paintings in Welsh Churches. Over to you, Richard. Thanks.
Right, noswaith dda pawb. Thank you for your kind introduction, too kind really. I'm very pleased to give this lecture. It's going to be, I hope, a fairly relaxed lecture. I've chosen a lot of images from the book. You can see the cover on the screen. The only problem is really, you know, when to stop. So I hope I'll be able to stop at the appropriate moment. I hope you'll forgive a bit of sales talk. It's inevitable. All I'll say is that we printed 1,500 copies of the book last year. We've sold a lot. There are no plans to reprint it. So once it's gone, as the supermarket slogan has it. I have to say the book isn't a solo effort. It's the orchestration of many voices, and my illustrious co-authors, Tony Parkinson and Jane Rutherford, responsible for the case studies, and we'll hear more about those later. Their names are on the title page. In addition, I have to thank all those who recorded wall paintings over many years at the Commission, notably Ian Wright and Dylan Roberts. the book was written during lockdown. It's a pandemic production, and somehow Christopher Catlin and Nancy Edwards found the money to publish it, but not only that, to publish it in a form that did justice to the illustrations. So, for some reason, the slide won't go forward. Oh yeah, here we are. Right. So where to start? Well, I'm going to start in Brecon Cathedral. It's 2012, and the Commission is engaged in tree ring dating. We're trying to tree ring date church roofs to get a chronology of late medieval buildings. Most church roofs are pretty inaccessible, but as it happens, Brecon Cathedral has got the former priory roof just over that vault that you can see in the image. The vault was installed in the 19th century under a medieval roof. Getting to the roof involves a claustrophobic journey through intramural passages, but eventually you reach the ringing chamber of the tower, and you can drop down onto the vault, which is disturbingly dusty, in fact, and dark. And this is what you see. We had very good lights, and so we could immediately see that the roof still retains some of its original color. I have to say, in parenthesis, if you're looking at stuff in churches, you have to have good lights. So this is what we saw. It's a boss, a painted boss. It's got it's a sort of stylized. It's got stylized vine leaves and grapes. The leaves are painted yellow. The grapes are red, and it's got a black background. And for me, it's astonishing that paint color dating back over 550 years should survive until the present day. But not only that, in fact, the whole roof was once painted, now covered, or was covered with lime wash at the Reformation. As you can see, we successfully tree ring dated it to 1443, 1404, and wall paintings are terribly difficult to date. So 1443, 44 give us the date after which the trusses were painted. This truss was painted, then covered with lime wash at the Reformation. This drawing from Tony's book on Brecon Cathedral does actually give you an idea of some of the patterning on the truss. You can see a leaf trail on the tie beam, but what are those starry shapes on the principal rafters? Right, they are in fact actually stars. Lead stars, a remarkable survival. They were formerly gilded. You can see traces of gilding. I'm just going to put the pointer on. Right, spotlight. And so, yeah, you can see traces of gilding here. And where the lime wash just couldn't quite reach under the stars, you can see traces of red color here. And I want to emphasize that the dominant color in the medieval church was red. Blood red, with its associations of Christ's sacrifice on the cross and the blood of martyrs on which the church was built. I think Brecon Priory does give you a very good understanding of the visual changes of the Reformation, the shift from the blood red of the medieval church to the white of the post-medieval church. And it takes, and the point is that the Reformation is not only a political and religious change, it's a visual change as well. But it does take some effort of the imagination to realize that our ancestors lived in a world of color and design, especially when we know from our own Zoom calls how many people live in quite bland interiors. So I'm going to say a few general words now about wall paintings and then move on to church paintings. But it's important to understand that wall paintings were present in both domestic and ecclesiastical buildings. So I want to make a few points. The first is when you uncover a wall painting deliberately or accidentally, it sometimes doesn't last very long. Now, this is the moment of discovery. It's a house called Nantios, not far from Aberystwyth. The architect has peeled back some Hessian back plaster to reveal a shimmering pattern of stylized shamrocks. And at this point, a whole range of emotions runs through the discoverer. Of course, there's excitement, the thrill of discovery, but then there's anxiety when you realize that the cost of stabilizing the painting, conserving it, and revealing it is going to be astronomical. Finally, you realize you don't really like the painting and it's covered over again. And unless you take a photograph as here, you'll never know, other people will never know about it. So that's the first point. The second point is that usually in historic buildings, churches or houses, we're dealing with a fragment. And this is a fragment of a painting from the parlour in this house, Trewalter, which is dating from the 1650s. The parlour is the range to the right of the cross passage here. The house has been demolished and the wall painting has now gone, but fortunately, the talented Dullan Roberts made a coloured record of it, and you can see it's red. They're tulips, carnations, berries, and some black line work. The design is probably a representation in paint of a design on fabric. And the third point I want to make is that wall paintings are very often imitations of designs in other media. So it's particularly dramatic with the painted wallpapers of the 18th century when wallpaper was heavily taxed. This is from a Carmarthenshire house. I particularly like the stenciled leaf trails here. And I really like this border of oak leaves and acorns. And of course, with painted wallpapers, you had no problems with placing the border in the right place. The last point really is that the further back you go in time, the scarcer and the more fragmentary wallpaper, more fragmentary wall paintings become. But there are exceptions, and this is an absolutely glorious exception. The house is Killey on the Radnorshire, Breconshire border. It's a hall house built in the early years of the 16th century. And with this house, you go in through the doorway of the cross passage, you turn right into the hall, and this is what you see. A wonderful and sophisticated painting at the high end of the hall, which formerly formed the backdrop to the high table and formal dining. It is sophisticated. It's on a black ground, a black ground, and there's a design in red, yellow, brown of leaves and flowers. The leaves are curled as here, and in the firelight, as I've witnessed, the leaves appear to move and dance. In amongst the foliage, there are various animals, and you can see here an inquisitive cat, possibly the first illustration of a cat in Wales, and an inquisitive bird. And a collared dog. The lesson is really, and we'll see it in church wall paintings, these paintings weren't merely decoration. You were meant to look at them and to look at them carefully. The painting at Killey probably dates from the second half of the 16th century, when a ceiling was inserted in the hall. The frieze at the top of the painting is just below the ceiling. As I said, the earlier you go back in time, the rarer wall paintings become. It's extremely difficult to find in Wales traces of paint. There are literary references, but actually physical traces of paint in domestic buildings in the medieval period. So where do you go to find medieval churches and with painted decoration? And the answer is, of course, churches. Now, this is a classic church. It's Llangar in Meirionydd. In the 1860s, a new church was built at Cynwyd, and the old church was not exactly abandoned, but just kept ticking over for occasional services and for funerals. It was never touched by the Victorians. It was one of those churches that the Victorians forgot, and as a consequence, it retained its Georgian interior, which is a sort of white plastered sepulchre with plastered ceiling and plastered walls with box pews. The church became extremely dilapidated after the war. Props were inserted to shore up the ceiling. The church became in a terrible state. Demolition seemed possible, and then a kind of miracle occurred. The Department of the Environment, this is in the newly formed Department of the Environment, in the 1970s decided to take it into public guardianship. And in the 1980s, it was splendidly restored with the removal of the Georgian ceiling to expose the medieval roof. I'm not sure that would happen today. And the removal of the top layers of lime wash on the walls to remove the wall paintings, to reveal the wall paintings. So there was quite a sandwich on the walls. So we can see here at the top here, an 18th century inscription with a characteristic frame. It's actually Gweddï'r Arglwydd, the Lord's Prayer. Beneath that, there's a layer of lime wash, and then the first medieval painting here, this frame structure, and then behind it, an earlier medieval painting, which seems to be a depiction of heaven as a celestial city. The later medieval painting, this frame structure is very interesting. There are 7 compartments. There are 2 tiers of 7 compartments, and they seem to be, it's been convincingly suggested, the compartments which depict the 7 deadly sins and the 7 works of mercy. And this would have dominated the medieval church, as seen here in Jane Durrant's wonderful cutaway drawing. Set-piece paintings were common in medieval churches. I really like this characteristic painting of St. Christopher at Llanynys in Denbighshire. St. Christopher, a rather grizzled St. Christopher, is shown carrying the Christ child on his shoulders across a dangerous river. As Christopher crosses the river, the child gets heavier and heavier, and you can see Christopher's quizzical looks as he wonders why the child is getting so heavy. And of course, Christ is carrying the sins of the world. There are lots of interesting detail in this painting. I really like the way Christopher's staff has sprouted these blue leaves. I think this blue is lapis lazuli, a fabulously expensive pigment that was mined in Asia. There's detail everywhere, but particularly around Christopher's giant feet. And here you'll see lots of fish swimming. There's no need to put the detail in, but they did. So there's certainly a ray here and a swordfish and the medieval favorite, a lamprey. And the point of these details was to draw you into the painting and to contemplate it. And this was especially significant with paintings of St. Christopher, because to look on the painting was rather like a prayer, and the prayer would keep you safe, safe from sudden death for the following day. There were, of course, other set piece paintings. St. Christopher was on the north wall facing you as you came in. St. George was generally on the south wall. And St. George represented really the battle between good and evil that was present in at a mundane level in everybody's lives. And here you can see the painting is much faded, and we'll see a fabulous St. George at Llancarvan soon enough. The painting is faded, but you can still make out that it's full of detail, from the armor of the knight with his plumed helmet and sword to the way in which the horse is dressed. I think we have to understand that in the medieval church there were set piece paintings, but the church wasn't really like a gallery, where paintings were strategically arranged. We now understand, I think, from the site I'm going to talk about next, we now understand that medieval churches had a kind of all over covering of paint. The paint was everywhere, from floor to wall painting, to wall plate, and into the reveals. There are a lot of paintings, but they were all jostling for attention, and the way they got attention was through the inclusion of detail. We understand this a bit more, I think, from the rescue work at Llandeilo Talabont Church here, on a bend of the river here near Pontarddulais. St. Tylo's was another church that the Victorians didn't get round to restoring. It was like Llangar, it was abandoned for regular worship in the 1860s when a new church was built in the industrial settlement here. But the old church was kept ticking over with occasional services, especially funerals, and regular lime washing, in which not only the church but the churchyard walls were lime washed. The church got into became increasingly dilapidated after the war, and then in 1984 there was an absolutely deplorable theft. The roof covering was stolen. Surely, that's one of the 7 deadly sins. The roof covering was stolen. Water poured in, taking the plaster off the walls, revealing wall paintings, and then washing them off. A team from the Royal Commission and Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust and the National Museum recorded as much as they could before the paintings disappeared. And this cutaway drawing by Jane Durrant shows the wall paintings that were found, but also the way in which, as I said, the interior of the church was completely painted, not only set piece paintings, but fillers and geometrical decoration, to fill up the space. So these are some of the identified paintings. You went into the church, through the porch, into the south aisle here, and immediately saw the painting of St. Christopher. Lots of paintwork in the south aisle, lots of geometrical work, but at the east end, there were two paintings here, important paintings, and the set piece paintings extended into the nave. At the east end of the south aisle, there was a dramatic find. This face appeared, a serene face. At first it was thought that it was the Blessed Virgin Mary, but as more was uncovered, that's the restored version, it became clear that it was Saint Catherine with the bladed wheel here and the sword, the instruments of her martyrdom. And it's probable that the altar in the aisle was dedicated to her. On the other side of the altar, there was this depiction of the bound Christ here before the crucifixion, with the words, the Latin inscription above, Ecce homo, behold the man. And these were the words spoken by Pontius Pilate before he showed, or as he showed Christ to the child, Christ to the crowd. There are lots of reminders about the crucifixion here, including a football-like skull, and that's a reminder that the crucifixion took place at Golgotha, the place of the skull. In the nave, there were more paintings. This shows the conservators at work, and they're working on a picture here of the Trinity. I beg your pardon. Not sure if I can retrieve this. Yeah. Oh no, it's gone. I do beg your pardon. I'll have to. For some reason, the images are jumping and I can't retrieve them, but no matter. In the nave, there were some wonderful paintings, including a painting of the Trinity, a filler, a border, and then a wonderful painting of the mocking of Christ. And there Christ looks at the viewer, full face, and with a sort of serene expression, and flanking him are the mockers with ugly faces, including bulbous noses. They're spitting at Christ. The spit is very well drawn and looks like the ends of a scourge or flagellum. The church, in due course, an inspired decision was made to move the church, rebuild it in St. Fagans and recreate the wall paintings. And this is what we see here, the recreated church with the wall paintings. You can see here on the left, the depiction of the Trinity and the border. I have to say it's not to everyone's taste. I have heard it, the interior, the restored interior, described as horrible. And in fact, more than that, as expletive deleted, horrible. It's not to everybody's taste, but that's the shock of the new. Sorry, the shock of the old. The importance of Llandilo Tel y Bont was that it actually raised consciousness about wall paintings. And just as this church was opened at St. Fagans in 2007, a thin line, a red line, was found under the just below the wall plate at this church, St. Cadoc's Llancarvan, and this turned out to be the discovery, I suppose, of the century. So there's Llancarvan Church, nice towered church with nave and aisle, as at Llandilo Tel y Bont. The aisle has got some big late medieval windows, and these light the interior beautifully, illuminating the very expensive roof. These closely spaced trusses, a wagon roof, are extremely costly. The screen that you can see there, and of course the wall paintings on the south wall. And these are the wall paintings. In the middle is a St. George and the Dragon, the biggest, the best and the most complete, I think, in England and Wales. To the left, there's a painting of the Gallant, Death and the Gallant. And to the right here, the 7 deadly sins, which continue round the corner and become the 7 works of mercy. Death and the Gallant is a very interesting painting. Here we see the Gallant dressed in the height of mid-15th century fashion, with a jerkin, a short jerkin, hose here, Monmouth cap, pointed shoes, and a ridiculously long sword. He's living for the day, but little does he realize that round the corner death lurks, and it's kind of literally round the corner that the painter has painted death in the window reveal. There we see death, a kind of grinning skeleton in the shroud, and he's about to take, he's grasped the Gallant's left hand, and he's about to take him on a journey from which he will never return. The 7 deadly sins are beautifully drawn and with humour, and heads of ghastly, hellish dragons appear in the compartments of every sin, and actually descend, although you can't see it very well, to a body. The necks come from appropriate parts of the body. These are drawn with humour. As an example, this is Avarice. Avarice is shown with a tray of money, egged on by a devil, and the tray of money is being heated by the fiery breath of a hellish dragon. Below is Sloth, and Sloth is represented by a sleepy head, reluctant to get out of bed, even though the curate is ringing the bell to tell him that it's time for mass there. And again, egged on by a little devil. But it is St. George, which is the marvel here, absolutely full of wonderful detail, from the armour of St. George to the caparison of the horse. At the right of the scene, the Virgin Mary blesses the scene, and to the left you see the princess with the lamb, bait for the dragon, of course. And then in the castle or walled town, there's her parents, the king and queen, watching on anxiously. And a wonderful detail, there's a face here of a prisoner in the tower, looking on at the scene. The conservators, Anne Ballantyne and Jane Rutherford, say there's no evidence for underdrawing of this St. George. It seems extraordinary, but it looks as if the artist, who must have been a master, just actually drew it. It's it's very painterly. I like the way the horse and the dragon are locked in combat, eyeball to eyeball. The lance has gone into the dragon's mouth, but it actually emerges round the corner in the window reveal, and constantly there's so much energy in this painting that it keeps breaking out of the frame. Those are highlights of wall paintings discovered in the last 50 years or so. You have to ask, are there more wall paintings waiting to be discovered? And of course, the answer is yes. And just as one example, I'm going to take the example of this church at Llanelliw in Breconshire as a church which is really full of potential as regards wall paintings. Regular services at this church stopped some years ago, and it's now in the care of the splendid Friends of Friendless Churches organisation. So you go into the church through the porch, and here the door is full of wonderful vernacular detail. The doorway is just is timber, but it's so amazingly substantial. And there you look through the porch, and immediately you can see wall paintings in front of you on the north wall. They're actually 18th century text, but shows the potential. You go into the church, and the church is actually dominated by this extraordinary late medieval red painted screen. And there's a lovely painting by Frank Armstrong, Victorian painting, before the church was tidied up, which shows the kind of holy gloom that it had in the 19th century. Dullan Roberts's record drawing of the screen shows there's an accurate colour match of the red, and it's blood red, but it's paint, not ox blood, as a lot of people believe. The screen is covered in tiny white 5-petaled flowers. There's the ghostly image of a cross. The cross was removed at the Reformation, leaving this shadow. The screen marks the division between nave and chancel, and in the chancel the mystery of the Mass took place. And you wonder, are there any paintings in the chancel? Well, plaster or lime wash has flaked off the north wall of the chancel, revealing this pattern here of stenciled palmettes, that is stylized palms. I think this sort of pattern must have been quite common in the chancels of Mid Wales. This is Diserth, and again the lime wash has come off the wall, and you can see a stenciled pattern there on the east wall. And this is Dullan's record drawing, and you can see the different stenciled elements. Fleur-de-lis, often associated with the Virgin Mary. IHS, the sacred name of Jesus, the palmettes, the border. And it's quite clear when you look at it, this forms the setting for an image niche here. And the image niche was presumably filled with a polychrome statue. Now, if you go back in the nave, you can search for medieval wall paintings, and there's certainly one. This is quite an unusual one. It shows 2 pairs of feet either side of a pole, and I think these are the feet of Adam and Eve either side of the Tree of Knowledge. It's still covered with a lot of lime wash, and lime wash covers the rest of the medieval paintings that may survive. So you have medieval paintings, layer of lime wash, and on top of the lime wash you have post-Reformation texts and coats of arms. The coats of arms were a consequence of the various acts of supremacy which made the monarch head of the church. These royal arms were regularly repainted with the change of monarch, so early examples tend not to survive. So there are no Elizabethan examples in Wales. There's a detail of the one surviving. But there is an early Stuart one, James I, and those are the royal arms of the Stuart, and at the bottom of the painting it says, "God save King James," with the date 1604, a year after his accession. That's quite faded, but there's a brilliant restoration example dated 1661. The colours are wonderful. I have to mention this point, choosing my words carefully, that the supporters, the lion and the unicorn, are always shown potent or priapic, but this feature fades in the 18th century with the Hanoverians. There are plenty of texts in this church, as in all post-Reformation churches. The Reformation, as a consequence of the Reformation, churches were white painted and texts introduced. At first, with an Elizabethan order, there was just the Ten Commandments, probably only in English. The church warden accounts at Swansea record in 1561 that they'd bought a printed copy of the Ten Commandments, in fact, for £1, pasted it on a board, paying 1 4 to the joiner, and then displayed the Ten Commandments. Texts become more common in the early 17th century as a consequence of the 1604 canons or regulations of the Anglican Church, which required that the Creed, the Lord's Prayer, and the Ten Commandments were to be displayed in churches, along with chosen or godly sentences. There was no language requirement, so really for the first time Welsh and English had equal status in the parish church, and this is an early painted inscription in Welsh from the Book of Haggai about restoring the temple, and it's in black letter. It's a 17th century one. There's a fragment of the date there. And it's been overpainted on the St. Christopher that we saw at Llananis earlier. So the post-Reformation church was had coats of arms and a lot of texts, whereas the medieval church, as I've explained, the paint was rather like a skin that covered everywhere in the church, with the paintings jostling for attention. In the post-medieval church, the walls were white, and they were rather like a notice board on which the coat of arms and the various texts were hung. So churches full of this material, but who were the painters, one wonders? Medieval painters are mostly anonymous, but in the post-Reformation period, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries, we know more about the painters. And we know especially a lot about Thomas Jones, the author of this tract, who left an autobiography in verse called Mercy Triumphing Over Judgment, and that was published in 1641. And the book is about Thomas Jones as a Sabbath breaker, and he describes how on the Sabbath he's returning from an event, the horse stumbles, he's thrown off the horse, and he receives a terrible injury to his head. He's carried insensible into Brecon Priory, and it takes him 4 years to recover. And at first he's lost the power of speech. But at the end of 4 years, when he's recovered, something extraordinary has happened. He finds he's not only acquired the ability to versify, and this autobiography is written in verse, he's acquired the ability to paint. And for the greater glory of God, he applies to the Bishop of St. David's for a license to become a church painter. And as he says in his autobiography, he adorns with inscriptions and other material most of the churches in Breconshire. Of course, you wonder if any of these inscriptions have survived. And yes, there are black letter inscriptions in Breconshire, which may well have been painted by Thomas Jones. And in particular, there's a lovely set of black letter inscriptions at Patriciot on the Breconshire-Monmouthshire border. It's a lovely church, a must, a place that everyone should visit. There it's seen through the 20th century Lich Gate, and there's the interior. The church is celebrated for the screen, a late or rather early 16th century screen, probably erected just before the Reformation, never painted, but the interior should be equally celebrated for these 17th century inscriptions. The best set really anywhere. So you have the royal coat of arms, and then to the right of that you have the creed, and then facing it you have the 10 commandments here. Now, in the early days of the Reformation, inscriptions were painted on boards, and then the boards attached to the wall. And here we can see that the painter, probably Thomas Jones, has made the frame, this red painted frame, but included fictive fastenings to attach it to the wall. The inscription is beautifully painted, but of course printers and painters often made mistakes. In the so-called Wicked Bible of 1631, the 7th commandment was, the not was left out of the 7th commandment, so it read, thou shalt commit adultery. There isn't such a terrible error in these 10 commandments, but Thomas Jones has left out the word cattle here, which has been interlined carefully. Black letter text, which we find so difficult to read, gave way in the later 17th century and in the 18th century to Roman and Italic lettering, and some churches were repainted in the 18th century. This is Killicum, and there's a nice cartouche there which gives the date of the painting and the name of the painter, John Arthur. I just ask you really to take note that this early 19th century memorial has encroached on the paintings. There was a change of taste round about 1800 when painted decoration began to fall out of favour, and the county historian for Brecon Theophilus Jones, describes the church at Llanigon in this way. He says the walls of the nave are decorated with, excuse me, I just have with daubs of death in the time, a wretched imitation of the king's arms, and many a holy text strewed around. And he suggests that a little white lime would be more ornamental than these texts. And he says, I fear, would have an equal effect in promoting the devotion or loyalty of the parishioners. So, and in fact, some late Georgian churches become rather like white sepulchres, as the inscriptions are painted over. And that's, you know, how it was at Llangar. But in fact, inscriptions were already falling out of favour for another reason. I don't know if you can see it here, but these early 19th century memorial tablets have been placed on top of painted inscriptions. Substantial farming families had an enthusiasm for wall memorials, which they placed on walls, and actually placed them over painted inscriptions. Some of these memorials were painted, like this one in Patricio, and these painted memorials are really the end of the line, the last work by the travelling painters. And that's a lovely thing. I'm going to end with this image of the smiling winged cherub painted on one of these memorials. So I hope I've shown you the interest of wall paintings, both pre-Reformation and post-Reformation. The work of discovery goes on, of course. I think it's perfectly possible for anyone to discover a new wall painting in a church, and possibly an important one. You just have to keep your eyes open, have a powerful torch, and the golden rule: take a photograph, because the wall painting or the inscription may not be there for very long. So I'll end at that point, and thank you for listening.
Well, diolch yn fawr Richard am y sgwrs ddiddorol iawn. Thanks very much for a very, very interesting talk, which I very much enjoyed. Right, I'm going to now hand over to Sian Rees, just to say thank you on behalf of the Cambrian Archaeological Association. After that, I'm going to come back and sum up with a couple of sort of adverts for our next events. But for now, over to Sian.
Thanks very much, David, and thank you so much, Richard, for, I mean, we all knew from your book that it was going to be a fantastic lecture with sumptuous illustrations, and I mean, it was just absolutely that. And I think when you think about this accumulative knowledge, both from you and your predecessors, of course, which was acquired over so many years, and you're just overwhelmed by this sort of erudition and the amount of it all. But you tend to forget perhaps the infrastructure, as it were. I mean, the actual nature of the wall paintings themselves. I was involved. It was with Hurst Conservation, actually, with Llangar. When I first became an inspector, yes. And then subsequently at UNE, where really you had to have the light in the right direction to be able to see them at all. It was so difficult and so ephemeral were the nature of the product that you're that you're working on. One is full of admiration for the work that you've done, but there's also you have to remember the infrastructure that you have to put up with as well. I mean, all that traveling, gosh, and all that working with the technical aspects with the photographers so that you can actually see the things and light them properly for the illustrations for that book. It's really quite remarkable, as well as all the groveling around in the dark, as you showed us at the first slide from Brecon. And also all that arrangement of trying to find the keys for these churches. It must be an enormous problem. But isn't it all worth it to produce such a book and make such a contribution to the knowledge of our Welsh painting tradition and our churches, and also for us tonight, obviously, for such a lecture. And thank you so very much indeed for your work. Which only leaves me, David, with the responsibility of thanking the staff of the Royal Commission for organising and ensuring the smooth running of this lecture. Thank you so much for that and facilitating that. Thank everybody for attending. To urge anybody who's not a member of the Cambrians at the moment to become one, come and join us, and to wish everybody here a very happy Christmas on behalf of the trustees of the Cambrian Archaeological Association. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sian. And if anyone has got any further questions about the talk, you're more than welcome to contact us after the talk, either through social media or by using the details on our website. A croeso I chi ar unrhyw cwestiynau petlach atom. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to both Richard and Sian for a fantastic night. Thank you everybody for coming as well. Thank you for everybody who's given such good wishes as well in the chat. Lots of thanks and lots of comments about the quality of Richard's talk. So thank you very much. Good night. Nostar.
Nostar, yeah, Nadolig llawen.